I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and here today with me is David Jollie, Manager Market Analysis at Anglo. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
Great. We are here at Minds and Money in New York, and your talk this afternoon will focus on platinum as a potential investment opportunity. For those who may not be familiar, can you give a brief rundown of what the market looks like right now?
Okay, so we can start on the supply side. And platinum is quite unusual compared to a lot of other metals, so very heavily dependent on a few locations where it comes out of. So the bulk of it comes out of South Africa, and it's the primary produced metal along with palladium, rhodium, a little bit of chrome, a few other things as well, nickel, copper as well. But most of it's coming out of South Africa, a lot out of Russia, out of the polar region, where it's a byproduct of palladium. And then little bits out of North America, out of Colombia, out of Zimbabwe as well. And the supply side, therefore, relatively constrained by the number of sites, and certainly constrained by, I guess, a recent relatively low price environment. So CapEx has been relatively low. Production has been relatively flat over, say, the last 5 years. And I think if you're going out over the next 5 years, you'd expect still relatively flat primary production. On top of that, you have a recycling market, which is kind of easy to forecast in a sense. These are high-value metals, platinum particularly. Therefore, where you can access it in terms of recycling, you do. So a lot of that's in terms of spent, used auto catalyst, so catalytic converters for cars, some jewelry recycling, some industrial recycling. So you see supply sort of edging overall between those two, gently higher, but not really doing anything exciting. On the demand side, we really see three big applications and a fourth of interest. And the three big applications are the car market, where platinum is used in catalytic converters to clean up car exhaust. And that's maybe 40% of demand in a given year. We see the jewelry market, where it's probably the best known, and that's probably about 30% of the market, a lot of that in China for platinum jewelry, a lot of it for bridal jewelry, but also in the US and in Europe as well, and increasingly in India. And then on top of that, you also see a lot of what we call industrial applications, which is pretty much a black box of everything else you can imagine, where platinum's used for its ability to withstand high temperatures or its catalytic activity in a whole range of applications in the glass sector, in the petroleum sector, a whole range of other things. And then finally, it's valuable, so you see it in the investment sector as well. People want to own ETFs, they want to own physical products as well, whether that's coins or bars, all sorts of things. And the demand side, much more mixed, I would say. The industrial demand pretty strong, investment demand actually pretty strong, although quite variable according to where prices go. But on the other side, the jewelry up and down. Some markets, India doing really well, China doing, I think, less well. And that's really a whole range of things going on behind that. It's not about the popularity of the jewelry, it's the industry itself, the jewelry industry. And the car industry, we're pretty highly tied to, in platinum, its use in diesel cars. So what you've seen is a lot of skepticism about the environmental performance of diesel cars, and that's had a negative impact, I think, on sentiment and probably therefore on prices as well.
So main driver right now behind demand is the role of platinum in vehicles. There have been some concerns that demand will fall as electric vehicles become more common. Is that something investors should worry about right now, or would you say that's more of a long-term concern?
I think you have two different things going on at the moment. One is what's happening with diesel. So if you look at a gasoline car, typically that's a palladium rhodium catalyst, although you can use platinum. If you look at a diesel, it's a platinum-rich catalyst. So where we see diesel market share falling for light-duty vehicles in Europe, that's a negative in demand now. It's relatively limited in scope, but it is a negative, and it's much more negative in sentiment terms. And we don't see that as necessarily a massive issue going forward. We can see some substitution between these metals. And we can see other things going on as well. So growth in heavy-duty trucks using diesel engines, using platinum catalysts. So there's a little bit of concern short-term about what happens in diesel generically. Electric vehicles, as you say, I think are a longer-term call. So at the moment, number of electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles, in pretty much every country is less than 2% of sales. It's small numbers, and with growth in the total number of vehicles sold, you're actually seeing more conventional vehicles sold despite that growing market share. So actually for us, we see that as a longer-term question. And then even within that, the question of electrification, which is what I'm here really to talk about, is an interesting one because it's not just a battery question, it's a hybrid vehicle question. and it's a fuel cell question, and those all have very different outcomes for platinum and for the other precious metals as well that we look at.
Right, so in your talk, you'll also be going over the role of platinum in fuel cells. From what I understand, currently fuel cells account for relatively little platinum demand, but is demand seen growing moving forward?
Yeah, so if we look at our market, platinum production per year and demand per year is roughly 200 tons. Use in fuel cells might be 1 ton, might be a couple of tons, but it's a pretty small segment. If it grows, it will grow quite dramatically. So we can look at maybe in the future 10 grams of platinum per fuel cell vehicle. If you multiply that up, if you get to 10 million vehicles a year, you're getting substantial amounts of metal. If you go to 50 million vehicles a year, which I think is a massive challenge, and that's not a forecast we would have, then you're looking at it saying these will be very large amounts of platinum, and that has some interesting challenges for the industry to say, how do we produce that and what do we do with byproducts? And there's a lot of things around there. So it's a longer term question. And I think we should always I have to be careful not to use the word cynical, skeptical about these technologies, whether that's batteries or whether that's fuel cells, and say, how do we see these things happening? They can happen, they can become commercial, but there are a lot of steps to get there, and they're not trivial steps. So if we want fuel cells to happen, we ourselves do market development. We will invest in a small number of hydrogen refueling stations. We've invested in technology to try and get fuel cells to be more easily commercialized. And that's kind of the way we head. So it's an interesting story. I think it's one where people have a little bit of skepticism because they've heard about fuel cells for a long time, certainly in my space. So we don't want to say this is something that will happen because doing that doesn't mean it's going to happen. What we want is to try and make it happen if we can.
So lots of potential for fuel cells. I do know that some people have also been talking about replacing platinum in those. Is that a concern at all? Or
I think it's something we shouldn't take lightly. So if you look at the idea of what we call thrifting first up, which is reducing the amount of metal but without changing or without worsening its performance, that we would expect to see. And so if you look at a fuel cell car today, it might have, say, 50 grams of platinum in. That's not commercially viable, in my view. 10 grams is, and we can see ways to get to that. What you can see, though, is if you want to have a low-temperature fuel cell, which is what a car is, you don't want your car to don't want to turn it on and then take 25 minutes for it to start. You want it to start immediately, so it's got to work at low temperature. For that, you need a catalyst, and platinum and the platinum group metals are really good catalysts in that sort of environment. They've got really good durability, very good activity, so they start early, they start at low temperature, and they work for a long time. So from that perspective, I don't see in this application platinum being excluded. I think if you look at some higher temperature applications, so maybe in a building, then where the fuel cell might be on all the time, there you may be able to get away without platinum. But in the car sector, which is, I think, the biggest area of growth for us, then I think it's really hard to see platinum being taken out. The amount being reduced, absolutely, I think that will happen.
We've been talking about platinum, but it's difficult to mention platinum without also talking about palladium. Palladium is doing well right now, but assuming we get a turnaround in platinum prices, where will it stand?
So I think you have to look at the supply side and the demand side. So the supply side is pretty similar for both metals. There's more of palladium coming out of Russia compared to South Africa, where most of the platinum is coming out of. But the supply side looks quite similar. The demand side is quite different, though. So for palladium, about 85% is going into catalytic converters on essentially primarily gasoline cars. So one big application, a lot of other interesting applications, but the way everyone should think of it is most of this is the car sector. Clearly, therefore, number of cars and the type of engine that car might have or the type of powertrain is a real issue. What we have seen is prices going up quite dramatically over a period of time, and really this is only the second time in history where palladium is traded above platinum. At some point, that ought to incentivize car producers to say, how do we put more platinum back into a gasoline catalytic converter instead of palladium? So our view, I think, and I think the market's view in general is if you're looking at a year, 2 years, 3 years, at some point, you'll see some switching back of platinum going into catalytic converters, and therefore platinum probably trading at a premium to palladium. But I don't think that's a short-term story. That's not this year, it's not next year. But there's certainly a lot of switching between those two where you can use platinum in applications where palladium is used today.
Looking a little shorter term and just to close out, where can investors expect to see prices for these two metals go this year?
So we tend not to forecast prices themselves, but we can talk about the environment we're in. So certainly you're looking at where the dollar might go and looking at particularly where gold might go, and that seems to be a little bit becalmed. That tends to give you an idea where platinum might go particularly. There's a relative comparison between the two. I think what we do look at is, say, if you see production where it is today, and you think it has to stay at that level, we're not seeing the capex we need to see. So you have to imagine there will be higher prices at some point. In the short term, I think it's, you can take your own views on that. But in the longer term, you have to expect to see either higher prices or, I think, a lower production out of lower primary production.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That's all from me. Once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and this is David Jollie of Anglo American.